So, if someone receives a tax sale notice in Illinois today, what exactly happens next and what's the complete timeline that they're facing?
It all depends, Mike, on what kind of sale it is. At the regular tax sale, when you get a notice that the property is on a list to be sold, then the property is going to be scheduled whenever the tax sale is scheduled. When your property gets sold at the tax sale, that's when the time clock starts on the redemption period. Now, this is very important for our viewers to understand. The redemption period, that is the time period that an owner can pay the taxes and redeem the property, in other words, get it out of this sale process, is 2.5 years for an owner-occupied property and 1 year for a non-owner-occupied property. Now, there's an exception. If the property is on the scavenger sale, or if the property didn't sell on the regular tax sale, the redemption period is only 6 months. So you get the notice, property goes to the sale period whenever that sale period is scheduled. When the property sells, that's when the clock runs for the redemption period.
Gotcha. Can you kind of walk us through what that 30-day notice period is?
30-day notice period is a period you get that's a period where you can just pay the taxes and it doesn't proceed any further. The biggest problem that people have is that they get this 30-day notice and they ignore it. They put their head in the sand. So it's important that you pay attention to what's going on.
So if that property does go to auction, what happens on auction day?
Various bidders, like I've gone to the auction to buy property myself. Investors go to the auction, they bid on the property. The investors don't get to inspect the property. They have to do their own, tabletop inspections. They have to have their money. They bid on the property. Highest bidder wins. You put your money up. You have to buy it within a short amount of time, depending on various counties have different processes. And you get a certificate for the property. That's for the tax sale. Then at the actual sale itself, people come in and bid on the property. If you win that, then you go to court. You file a lawsuit to file a petition to be given a tax deed. We'll talk about more of that later.
So what is the redemption period and how does that work?
The redemption period for a tax sale or for delinquent taxes is the time a property owner has to pay the taxes and get the property out of this delinquency period and get it back.
So just like any real estate deal, there's always tons of deadlines. What are some of the most critical deadlines that property owners often miss?
For a tax sale, if you're an owner-occupied owner, so you're living in your own home, the first important deadline to realize is this first 30-day period when you get the notice. Then the next timeline is you have from when the property gets sold at the tax sale, a regular tax sale, you have 2.5 years from the date of the tax sale to pay those taxes, that is, redeem it. If you're a non-owner occupant, like an investment property or something, you have 1 year from the time of the tax sale. If its property is sold in a scavenger sale, you have 6 months from the date of the sale of the scavenger sale. Or if the property doesn't sell at the regular tax sale, then it goes to the scavenger sale. You get 6 months from the date the property gets sold at that scavenger sale to redeem the property. Those are the important deadlines.
So what are those differences between those three different types of sales?
Between like the regular tax sale and the scavenger sale?
Yes.
The regular tax sale is just the process that counties have in order for recouping property tax money that's not paid. If you don't pay your taxes, the counties still have to operate their operations, so they need a way to generate money. They have a tax sale. All properties that have back taxes, they put the properties up at a tax sale. Bidders come to bid on them. You pay money to pay the taxes to the county. County gets their money this way. And the investor gets a statutory rate of interest, 16, 17, 18%, on the money that you pay. So that's the incentive for the investors coming forward.
So, what are some of the most important things that people need to know about tax sale timelines?
Yeah, we've kind of talked about this and it bears repeating. The timelines are vitally important. The timelines are the time period by which you can still redeem your property. That is, get it from being lost. I can't say this strongly enough. In Illinois, it's one of the only states, in fact, I think it is the only state in the union where an owner can lose their property for not paying property taxes. So it's critically important that you pay attention to the various timelines and redeem the property. Go to anybody you can think of in the family, whatever, to get the money to pay those taxes so you don't lose your property.
Good.
Good.
So, what is the most important thing that people need to know about tax sale timelines?
That if you don't pay attention to them, you can lose the property. In Illinois, I'll say it again, and it bears repeating. I've said it, and I'll continue to say it. You can lose your property if you don't pay your property taxes and if you don't pay attention to the timelines for redeeming the property. That is, paying the back taxes to be current on your property taxes. To show you how serious this is in Illinois, property taxes can bump internal revenue federal tax liens in importance. I have a case right now I'm working on where there's a $500,000 mortgage on a property. That property owner did not pay the taxes. Taxes are maybe $5,000, $7,000, something like that. That $7,000 back taxes can wipe out a $500,000 mortgage on a property. That's how important this is.
So, what's the biggest mistake you see property owners make with timing?
Isn't your question, right?
Yeah. Gotcha.
Putting your head in the sand. The biggest mistake that property owners can make is putting their head in the sand and not paying attention to those timelines, not responding, not paying those taxes, thinking that I don't know what property owners think. I've been practicing for nearly 40 years, and I've seen nearly everything. The biggest mistake is not taking those timelines seriously, not paying attention to them, and not redeeming those taxes. Having said that, there are things that you can do to halt this process, and we'll talk about those later.
So, can you give us a brief, 30-second overview of what happens after you get a notice?
You get the notice. Then you've got a time period by which you pay those taxes before it goes to the sale. Then after that notice period is up, the sale is scheduled. The property either gets sold at the tax sale or not. If it gets sold, then you've got the redemption period starts, depending on whether it's an owner-occupied property or non-owner-occupied property. If the property doesn't sell at the tax sale, then your tax payments keep, piling up. Then the county can opt to put the property at a scavenger sale, which means it didn't sell at a regular tax sale. So the scavenger sale is scheduled, you get notified. If you can still redeem all the way up through this time, which means pay the property taxes. But if you haven't paid them, you haven't redeemed, property goes to the scavenger sale. An investor does buy that, buy those taxes, buy that property. They get a certificate. You've got 6 months to redeem that property. If not, the buyer of that certificate, the owner of that certificate, can go to a court and petition the court to give them a judicial deed, and you lose the property.
Can you tell us about a recent case where you helped save a family's home from a tax sale, obviously without revealing any confidential information?
Yeah, this has been a huge part of our practice lately because of all the activity and the uncertainty in Illinois law. There was one case where the property owner didn't pay the property taxes. Owner didn't have the money to pay the taxes, and the sale was coming up. And I knew this person got sick. The owner got sick later in life. There was a huge amount of equity in the property. The property was very attractive. So I knew it was going to go on the tax sale. What I did was I found an investor who was willing to do an equity share with the owner, basically gave them some money. The investor took a second on the property because there was only a very small property tax issue. There was no mortgage on the property either. The investor did a small second to give the owner enough money to pay the taxes. The property owner got back on their feet, paid back the investor, and we saved the situation. So that's an example.
So what was the family's situation when they came to you?
They had a medical emergency. They couldn't work. And they, like many property owners did, they just buried their head in the sand and just didn't know what to do. They were scared. They saw one of my videos and called into the office. I knew immediately how to help them, structured the situation. They wanted to adopt me, but I said, no, there was no need for that. But I did make them make me their specialty German chocolate cake. So that was a good trade-off. That was how we solved that situation.
So what legal strategy you did use to help them?
In that strategy, Mike, I really didn't use a legal strategy. It was just knowing investors would be more than willing to do an equity investment for them because there was no equity on the property. There was no mortgage on the property, lots of equity, desirable property. And I knew from talking to the client that they would pay the investor back. Investor had no risk because there was a lot of equity in it. So worst case, they had a lot of coverage with their investment in the property. Typically, though, the legal strategy that I'm using right now is literally a constitutional challenge to the Illinois statutes that allow you to take someone's property away.
So what was the outcome and how did that, change their lives?
They were able to keep the property. I can't tell you, well, you probably know. There is a deep emotional connection that people have with their homes. And it's one of the reasons why they bury their heads in the sand when they get in trouble. They can't conceive of this visceral security item being taken away from them. When I was able to help them, it was like a huge rock lifted off their shoulders. And I also gave them a come to Jesus conversation. Don't bury your head in the sand. They also had to pay me not a hefty fee, but they had to pay a fee for me solving this problem for them when they neglected it for so long.
So what would have happened to them if they didn't reach out and get help?
If they didn't reach out and get help, the investors at that sale would have purchased the taxes. They would have purchased that property at a tax sale, and these owners would have lost the property. They would have been evicted from their own property that they had owned for over 28 years. That's what would have happened.
So what's the most rewarding part that comes with helping families like this?
In this situation, it was a homemade German chocolate cake, which was great. It was, I tell you what, it was helping these people, but they told all their relatives. There was a party. I was invited to the party. I gave a little seminar at the party for how not to have this happen. I've gained a lot of clients from it. So as a business owner, as a lawyer, I got a lot of really strong business referrals from it. But as a human being, I was able to help some people stay in their homes. And that meant the world to me, using my legal skills and knowledge to help some people. That meant everything.
So a lot of people probably have never gone through this before. So what do you tell families when they think, it's hopeless and they're at the end of their road?
Yeah, first of all, I give them a little psychological counseling and tell them, look, this is a bad situation, yes. But the mistake you're making is identifying yourself with this bad situation. This is not the truth of who you are. So stop wallowing in it, get your head out of your you-know-what, and let's figure out what to do. After I kind of slap them around a little bit and they realize this isn't going away without doing the right thing, I'm able to focus them on the various legal options that are available to them. And there almost always are legal options.
So can you take us behind the scenes, what a typical day is like when you're handling tax sales cases at the courthouse?
Yeah, that's a great question, Mike. First thing I do when I take on a client and there's a tax sale, I confirm the status of the taxes for the property. I confirm whether they've been sold at a regular sale, the identities, the name, telephone number, contact information for the investors who have received the certificate. That's the first thing. Investor buys the taxes from the county, they get a certificate, then there's a tax sale that's on the horizon. Then I check to see how much time there is between when an investor got the certificate and when the tax auction is, when the tax sale is. I talk to the client, make sure that they understand what the legal fees will be, what it's going to take legally to do this. Then I investigate with the client what their options are for getting some money together to pay the taxes. In several cases, as we've talked about, I've brought in investors that I have access to that will equity share with the owner, essentially give them a loan, take a mortgage out on the property, and sometimes they'll do a second mortgage, give them the money to pay the taxes. We end the whole thing right there. But if for whatever reason, I also check the equity in the property, the current value of the property, whether there's a mortgage, what the value is, how much equity there is. That allows me to evaluate how likely this property is to go at the tax sale. The more desirable the property, the higher the equity, the more likely it's actually going to get purchased at a tax sale. I check all those things. I check when the next tax sale is. I figure out where we can get some money to come up with to redeem it. But if we can't get any money, then I look at a legal challenge, a constitutional legal challenge right now in Illinois to any tax sale. It literally is unconstitutional for an investor to get a tax deed through the Illinois process. If clients come to me after the tax deed has been issued, if judges are still issuing them, then I will evaluate whether it makes sense to do a legal challenge to that tax deed issuance in order to quash it. And then other than that, it's case-by-case specific legal analysis. The point is, though, there's almost always things you can do. Typically what happens at a petition for a tax deed is like any other lawsuit. The person who wants the deed, they got the certificate from paying the taxes to the county. They get a certificate. The redemption period is up. Taxes haven't been paid. Then the investor goes to the court to ask the judge to give them a judicial deed. They will file a notice. They'll file motions. They'll file pleadings asking the court, based upon the Illinois statute, that they want, and they have the certificate, they're entitled to a tax deed. The issue is this process is unconstitutional now in light of several United States Supreme Court decisions. Some judges are still issuing tax deeds, some aren't. But in any event, if all the other things that we've tried to do don't work or aren't available, I can file a petition in court to stop a tax deed based upon the United States Supreme Court decisions that's applicable here and stop this in its tracks. Now, even if I can do that, that won't stop the taxes that are due on the property. The property owner will still have to pay those, but it will give you time to figure out how to do that, and you won't automatically lose the property.
So how do you prepare for hearings like that?
I analyze the court case. I analyze all the filings that have already been filed in the case. I analyze time statutes. Have notices been provided? I look at all the procedural issues to see if I can challenge any of the judicial deed request based on procedural issues. If all of that is still sound and I don't have any procedural issues to challenge, then I can always challenge on the constitutionality issue.
So it's obviously got to be very stressful if you're a property owner going through, potentially a tax sale of your property. What's the atmosphere like in the courthouse when these property owners are in there?
It's really interesting now in this age post-COVID of court hearings. Nobody, very, very rarely do people go live to court anymore. It's all on Zoom. And almost never do I recommend that an owner actually appear in court. There's no need for the owner to be there. So basically, the atmosphere is pretty routine, just lawyers doing their thing.
So what's one thing that would surprise people about these courthouse proceedings?
How businesslike they are, how businesslike and routine the process is in court for people losing their houses. I mean, lawyers will casually ask the judge for a judicial deed, for somebody to lose their house. Now, the judges, in my experience, are very respectful. They do everything they can to adhere to the law, to bend over backwards, to give the property owners more time and to help them if their attorneys ask them to. But the process, the environment in court is very businesslike, very thoughtful. Everybody knows the seriousness of the situation. But if you step back from it and look about what's actually going on, it's kind of frightening how businesslike and calm it is as we're all just slicing up people's property.
So what should property owners expect if they do have to go to these court proceedings?
Wear good clothes, sit back, and don't talk unless I tell you to. Don't yell and scream. Don't start acting a fool, as my grandmother says. Be seen but not heard until or unless I tell you. The judge will almost never address a property owner in a situation like that. And I strongly recommend that property owners get an attorney. Call us. Don't go to court on your own, because there are too many legal technicalities here, many of which you can use to your benefit. But if you're a layperson and you're not an attorney, you'll completely miss these opportunities. So don't listen to Uncle Melvin when Uncle Melvin tells you can do it on your own.
So is it possible to stop a tax sale even after the auction has been scheduled? And if so, how?
After the auction has been scheduled, you can stop it by paying the taxes. Simple as that. So yes, you can by paying the taxes.
What legal mechanisms exist to help halt the tax sale process?
I can halt the tax sale process legally if there are procedural issues. For example, if the investor didn't give proper notice to the property owner of the tax sale, if any information in the notice is wrong, if the date is wrong, the time is wrong, even if the courtroom is wrong, I can raise procedural issues and stop the sale. The biggest legal strategy I can use to stop a sale is that in Illinois, the current Illinois tax sale procedure is unconstitutional based upon a Supreme Court decision case of several years ago that said any state process that takes someone's equity away because they didn't pay taxes is an unjust taking and is unconstitutional.
So how do injunctions work in tax sale cases?
Injunction is just a fancy word for saying I'm going to stop a process. If a tax sale is is far down the track, I can, and even after it's already been, let's say a judge grants the tax deed, I can file an injunction at that point, even after the tax deed has been issued. If there's a procedural issue, a constitutional issue, that I can challenge that whole process on.
So what about payment plans? Can those help to stop an auction?
No, a payment plan can't stop an auction. The only thing that can stop an auction is, one, paying the taxes and stopping the whole process that way, or B, having a legal challenge, either procedurally or substantively, to stop the process.
So, what are some real world examples of last minute interventions?
Most of the last minute interventions come, in my experience, when I can find an investor or the property owner has find some money from relatives or something to pay the taxes and can stop the whole thing. Even if we're in the property owner's in the process of getting the money, I can appear in court and say, Your Honor, my client is 5 days away, 3 days away from finding the money. I'd ask for a 30-day stay of this proceeding until my client can get the money to pay the taxes, and we can redeem the situation and stop the sale.
How late in the process can someone still take action?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. Let's take it from the beginning. You get a notice that the taxes are due and they're about to be sold to an investor. You can take action by paying the taxes. The investor buys the taxes and it gets a certificate. Then the redemption period starts. You can take action by paying the taxes. The property goes to tax sale. You can take action. You can file legal proceedings in order to stop the tax sale or to challenge the tax sale. You can take action. Even after a tax deed has been issued, you can bring legal challenges to challenge that tax deed procedure, either on constitutional grounds, procedural grounds. You can take action. So at all parts of this process, there are things that you can do. But if you don't know what your options are by consulting with an experienced attorney like the attorneys in my office, you won't know. You won't think you have anything you can do, and you'll just say it's a lost cause. Friends, it is not. There's things that you can do.
So, what gives you hope when you talk to someone and they think, oh, it's too late?
What gives me hope is that I know that my last ditch effort always, if I can't do any of the other things that are available, like finding an investor or finding some money, is that I can challenge a tax sale on U.S. Supreme Court constitutional grounds. I feel like Thurgood Marshall, right? I can challenge any tax sale and stop it. So that always gives me comfort right now in this environment as we're recording this before the Illinois legislature has revised the statutes.
So what's kind of the latest in the process that you've successfully helped someone?
We challenged a tax sale after the deed had already been issued. So that doesn't happen very often. There was a procedural problem that I raised, and it was serious TV kind of law stuff that never happens in real life, but there was a procedural issue. I raised it. The judge acknowledged it. We paused. We rolled back the sale. I wasn't going to be able to stop it permanently during that time. The client ended up finding some money and ended up redeeming the property out, but it gave him time.